Hello, dear parish family. Father Daniel here for another edition of Sabbath Reflections as we look now to the reading selections for the 22nd Sunday of Ordinary Time. Maybe you can recall as a teenager hearing the usual advice from your parents. Well, if your friends walked off a cliff, would you do the same? Would you follow them? It's a ridiculous and dramatic sort of example to kind of point out to us that at times we can fall into a sort of herd mentality. In other words, that it can be very easy for us sometimes, especially when we feel affinity for a group that we belong to just kind of follow them mindlessly with no room for critical thought or the consequences of our actions into some ridiculous and possibly even dangerous situations. Now, it may surprise you, dear friends, that it's to this reality that the gospel and the second reading from St. Paul speaks to today. When we think of our own lives as logical adults, we think, well, no, I think I've made up my mind. I think that I myself am the one discerning and critically looking at the options that are before me. But it may surprise you that even when it comes to good things, that it's so easy to fall into a sort of mentality where we just suddenly go on autopilot. St. Paul in today's second reading gives us some very challenging and also some very hopeful words. He says, "Do not conform yourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind." So we could rightly ask ourselves the question, have we truly, from our roots of who we are, been transformed by God? Or are we just going with the flow? To say nothing, at least for now, of how the world might influence us or conforming ourselves in that sense to society's standards, it's easy, even friends, when we're trying to do a good thing, like live our faith, that we can easily slip into a sort of, I guess you could call it a numb sorts of way of going about things. Think about it. When you participate in Mass, when you sit in the pews or watch the Mass now through this time, do you just sit as lumps on a log, or do you participate, as you rightfully should, in a sacrifice that you are also offering along with the priest and the whole body of Christ, recognizing that it's your sacrifice, your story, your salvation? Or do we just go with it? When we think about what the church asks from us each year, is it just like us paying taxes or dues? Or do we recognize that we are truly being called to conversion, and with a loving God behind the church, giving us all of these tools, most especially the sacraments, not that we could just get by or meet our yearly, weekly, or monthly standards, but that we can truly be transformed by Christ, such that all that we do as Catholics is meant to call us back to a greater vision that God first gave us when you and I were baptized, when you and I were lowered into the font and we died to self so that we can rise with Christ, to see people as He sees them, to see our lives and our plans as He would see them, not as we would. And there's nobody that's immune from this, friends. That desire to not really have God transform us, but to just kind of go with the flow while still maintaining our own set of presumptions and assumptions. Look at St. Peter today. The great St. Peter, our first pope, decides that he would rather disrupt or altogether ignore or even stand in the way of God's plans as he himself expresses them to his apostles, because he can't stomach it, because it's too much, and because he's still thinking by an old way where one's highest goal is to preserve themselves. Friends, it's easy to get stuck in that way. It's easy to put our mind and our faith overall on autopilot and just go with the flow. But that's not what Jesus is asking of you or I. He wants us to do the deep soul searching, the open heart surgery. He wants us to allow Him to totally reshape our heart and mind so that we might put on the heart and mind of Christ Himself, and thus be able to see our lives, the decisions we make, to remake our values and our standards, all in His vision, according to His love and His truth. Dear friends, Don't simply walk off the cliff just because everyone's doing it. Don't simply do the other things. I can't tell you how many times I, as a priest, we talk to our confirmation kids or our kids making their first communion even. And I get to ask them, well, why are you here? And they'll say, well, my grandma made me, my mother made me, my dad made me. What a sad answer, friends. What a sad answer that our children, with all of their brightness, with all of their talents and the abilities that God has given them, simply going with the flow. Where really they're being given an immense gift where they can show them who the gift they are to others and to a church that so needs them. Not just because someone told them to, not just to go along with the group. Friends, we are freely invited to freely choose to be transformed by God and to do amazing things for His church. So, are you going to make that decision to be transformed or just to get by? God bless you, and know that I pray for you and I love you very much. God bless.